So I am a veterinary epidemiologist. I'd like to think I worked in public health, but I doubt it. So I've been doing my postdoc work on trying to understand antimicrobial use in the livestock industries in Australia, particularly pigs and poultry. I'll show you what we've done, which is bugger all, quite frankly. The livestock sector under the ABA has developed some ABA pig prescribing guidelines. The poultry industry is working on some, but they will never be finished because they can't agree to put any actual prescribing information in there. Beef's not started, dairy's not started. They are going to be done being done as a collaborative arrangement through the ABA, and they are being done on a 12-month rotating basis, and so they're being done by committee. So as with everything done in Australia, it has to be agreed to by everybody, so that means it will never get finished. And so beef won't start till next year, and dairy is probably not going to start till after that, so we might be at least 2 or 3 years away before we even get any of those. Without those, we can't measure anything because no one can agree on what good looks like. As far as antimicrobial stewardship is concerned, the beef feedlot sector has a guideline. Let's go with that because they actually call it a guideline. It's not a plan. It doesn't involve any implementation. It doesn't involve any measurement. It doesn't involve actually telling anyone what they do or publicly making any of that available. The poultry companies, of which in the broiler sector there are 5, are all doing everything in-house with the Australian Chicken Meat Federation. What that means is that all of the companies have said that they have a plan, a stewardship plan, and they're all private because they're all private enterprises, they're all privately owned, and so the chance that we'll actually see what one of those might look like is about 0. They all say they have one. They've all measured how much antibiotic they're using, and the current strategy for the broiler sector is that they're going antibiotic free. So in about 2 years, there will be no antibiotics being used in the chicken meat sector, if there's not already, which is what they're all rushing for right now. And you'll see on the market, you can buy antibiotic free chicken, whatever that means. And so there won't be an issue in the chicken sector in terms of antimicrobial use, because they won't be using any. So what do we know about antimicrobial use in the livestock sectors? We did a survey, we tried to do a survey. We got rejected by the industries, by both of those sectors, the pig sector and the chicken sector, both sectors of the chicken sector. We know that 60% of antibiotics by volume in Australia are used in feed, and those in-feed medications are used by pigs, poultry, dairy, beef, and all the rest of them. And I say minor species, that means sheep. That's the majority of the animals in Australia, but they don't use antibiotics. There's nothing currently reported or published about antimicrobial use. The last publication came out in 2014, and it was for a period of 2005-2010. And that information is on imported volumes, and so it doesn't, and it's based on the labels, so it doesn't reflect what we're actually doing or using or how. So some of the work that I've been doing was on trying to understand what was being used and how. And so one of the things that the livestock industries in Australia is basing all of their no need to do anything, nothing to see here approach to implementation of antimicrobial stewardship is that this really great graph produced in whenever it was published now, 2014 did it come out, showed that Australia was amazing and that we were using hardly any antibiotics at all in our livestock species. And so that's great, except that's based on our import data. And it hasn't changed because, of course, we haven't done anything since then. And so the problem we have is that all these countries over here, which is now, have done a whole bunch of stuff. And so they're actually creeping up to us, but we've not changed and we've got nothing to measure it against. So we can't tell if we're doing any better than what we were. And if we look at between country benchmarking, you can see that in Australia in 2011, this is where we were at, and this is where Europe, the whole of Europe is, based on some actual real data. And you can see that there's a lot of comfort the industries can take from this data and show that they're actually got no problems at all from a total quantity of use. And that's great, because that's where the industries are quite happily to hang out and rest on their laurels and show that they don't actually need to do anything because there's nothing to see. So I did an audit, can't publish it because I'm not allowed to. We did some prescription auditing, and we found out that 71% of feed mill audit prescriptions were filled when they were presented. Only 61% of them were actually compliant with our legislation and with regards to what was actually supposed to be contained on a prescription. And Virginiamycin, which is the only critically important antibiotic available for use in animals in Australia, which is an in-feed medication for acidosis in ruminants, 100% of the prescriptions were non-compliant with the guideline. So they don't have to be compliant with the guideline, because a guideline is just a guideline. It's not actually a regulation or a rule. So technically they're not breaking any rules. But if you wanted to argue that there were some real problems and that we had something to do in Australia about the use of antibiotics in livestock, then we could hang our hats on that particular one. So according to all the vets I talked to, we've got no problems and there's nothing we need to do in the livestock sector because everything is fine. If we then look at antimicrobial use in feed in pigs, poultry and cattle, then you can see that most of our antibiotics are being used in pigs, hardly any of it's being used in chickens, so there is really nothing to see in the chicken sector. And in cattle, the biggest issue is, as I already said, is the use of streptogramins or Virginiamycin in our case. So the pig sector probably does have something to look at. The fact that they're all using low importance antibiotics, but these are the only antibiotics that they're using, is also something they're quite happy to hang their hats on. And the other problem, of course, is that there's hardly any antimicrobial resistance in any of the critically important bugs that we are investigating. So Salmonella and E. coli, we don't have vancomycin-resistant E. coli from pigs or poultry in Australia. And so we like to use that as other evidence to show that there's actually no reason to do anything publicly. So this is the data that I've generated based on our antimicrobial import data, and this shows you how much antibiotic we are actually using in our pig sectors. As you can see by that at 3,700 milligrams per kilogram of pig meat produced, we're using about 10 times as much tetracycline in our pig industry as they are in Spain, which is considered to be the highest use of antimicrobials in Europe. You might be concerned about that. Pig industry is not concerned about that. Why not? Because they don't even know. Just so that we're clear, they have no idea. So what does AMS implementation look like? Well, currently the poultry industry is running a self-assessment tool to assess whether they have good stewardship. It is based on WHO joint external evaluation process, but it is being done entirely self-audited in-house. So they've been sent a survey, they're going to fill in the survey, then someone else is going to decide whether they're good or bad in their AMS plan. I don't know about you, but most vets are pretty smart. And we're all pretty good at filling out a form and making sure that it has all the correct information in it. So a self-assessment tool to tell you how great we are at doing antimicrobial stewardship is going to make everyone look amazing. Let me assure you of that. Because even if you don't have an antimicrobial stewardship plan, at least 2 of the companies that I have worked with know that if you're not using any antimicrobials, then you don't need a stewardship plan. Because if you're not using any, why do you need a plan for that? So we know that because there's only 5 companies, it's highly unlikely this work is going to be published. So we'll have no idea. They'll all get a ranking. We won't know which of the 5 it'll be. And it's highly unlikely it's going to be publicly available, even though it's being funded by the government and AgriFutures. So 2 good reasons not to believe whatever you get told. The pig industry, they are probably the next up in terms of what they're actually doing. I'd like to say they were doing something. They at least have some prescribing guidelines, highly unlikely to be used by any of the vets in practice, great for teaching and great for new young vets to learn about how to prescribe, but that's about all, because the vets themselves think they're terrible and they are highly unlikely to use them. And then we're never going to assess whether the vets are actually following them or not anyway. But the pig industry itself is in the middle of working out how to develop some antimicrobial stewardship training modules for producers. Those vets that are actually trying to implement antimicrobial stewardship on farm have reported that they've pissed off quite a lot of their clients. That's the unintended consequences of antimicrobial stewardship, because they took out a bunch of drugs. It turns out the pigs grew just as well without them. And so now they're wondering what they were paying for in the first place. So that's one of the unintended consequences of antimicrobial stewardship in veterinary science. And the biggest problem that we have at the end of the day is that agriculture is big business. And if you think it's not big business, the rendering section of the agricultural industry, which is an industry that you wouldn't have even heard of, is worth 12 billion export dollars to Australia. That's about the amount that the health industry sucks out of our economy. So the rendering sector, which is all the dead stuff that gets munched up and sent overseas for export market, is paying for the health system. So it's all user pays. Vets make money from sales. Let's be real about that. There is absolutely no driver in Australia for vets to change their behaviour, because there's no regulations in place to do that. We're already using probably amongst the world's lowest amount per import, and so the government has a very hands-off regulation approach. In fact, we have a policy that says that we'll have no more red tape. All of our regulations in terms of poisons are managed and held by the health department, and so if they want to regulate a veterinary use, then the health department is responsible for that under the Poisons Act. So until they wish to do that, then even the Department of Primary Industries can't do anything about what vets do with regards to prescribing. And the last kicker, which makes it really good and why we should do more in antimicrobial stewardship in livestock industries, is that all the activities that are currently being done support, there's absolutely no need for change, because as far as the industries are concerned, and the message that gets told loud and clear, and because the focus is wrong, is that there's little to no AMR in any of the zoonotic pathogens, which is what we're measuring as an outcome. And the measure of our outcome in veterinary science should not be zoonotic pathogens in humans, because they're not important, and we don't treat zoonotic pathogens for humans in animals. So the drivers of antibiotic use in livestock production systems are mycoplasma and respiratory diseases. So we should be measuring antimicrobial resistance and pathogens of importance to animals, not pathogens of importance to humans. So until we start measuring that and actually having an outcome that's based on something that's actually measurable and implementable, then nothing that we do within the livestock sector in terms of AMS and protecting humans from public health disease will actually probably make any difference, quite frankly. And so that's it. So now that I've left you a cherry note on how good implementation is in animal health. Does anyone want to talk to me now?